I love Star Wars. I think it is one of the, if not the greatest pop culture franchise of all time. What George Lucas was able to create with that original trilogy, and even if they're not amazing, the prequel trilogy are still an iconic set of films that have shaped childhoods and a legacy of its own. You don't need to be a Star Wars fan to know this line.
I am your father.
To remember this moment. Or even this moment.
Hey, wait, I didn't mean that moment!
He kissed his sister!
I don't think I need to go on longer explaining that Star Wars is iconic. I think everybody knows at this point. But I think equally as iconic as it is, I think Star Wars is also known for how divisive it is. And despite what some people might try to tell you, it's been like this for a while. I know there might be some revisionist history going on and people trying to say this is not the case, but everybody hated the prequels only a few years ago. You couldn't mention Star Wars without people saying, well, the prequels suck. And now time has gone on and they're the second coming of Christ. Fun fact, the hate for the prequels and the hate towards the creator of Star Wars, George Lucas, is what pushed him to make Star Wars enter its most divisive era yet.
Today, I am proud to announce the Walt Disney Company is acquiring Lucasfilm, the global entertainment company founded by George Lucas and the home of the legendary Star Wars franchise.
That's right, in 2012, Star Wars was officially sold to Disney. Disney, the biggest entertainment conglomerate on the planet, some could debate a monopoly on the entertainment industry, now owns debatably the biggest entertainment franchise ever. Now before we get any further with this video, I want to clarify, this is not an anti-Disney Star Wars video because God knows there are an ungodly amount of those online. This is, however, me taking a look at this new era of Star Wars we've been in for a while, how it's turned into kind of a mess, but also how it gets way more hate than it deserves. Because I believe Disney Star Wars has given us some of the greatest Star Wars media in history, but also some of the worst. Today we're going to be exploring Disney Star Wars and also a way that we can course correct. This is the problem with Disney Star Wars and how to fix it. The beginning of the Disney Star Wars era was kind of quiet. Everybody was kind of holding out their judgment to see where Disney would take the franchise, and it wouldn't take too long to get our first taste of things. 2013 was really just setting Star Wars up inside of the Disney family, giving it a bigger presence at theme parks, putting out some merchandise,
And wrapping up Star Wars The Clone Wars, which is airing on a competing network.
and then some of the more sour news came along. Not only was LucasArts, the game studio that produced a bunch of fan-favorite Star Wars video games, shut down, but also the Star Wars EU was officially declared not canon.
Anything that wasn't the original 6 films or Star Wars The Clone Wars was not canon. This stretched from officially licensed books, video games, and animated programming that would now be branded as Star Wars Legends,
officially declaring that none of those events happened in the actual Star Wars universe. Both of these were two heavy blows to the fan base, and Star Wars also signed an exclusivity deal with EA to make Star Wars video games. But when it comes to these two decisions, I'm not completely against either of them. The shutting down of LucasArts, I'm sure, was a business decision to cut down on costs. Don't get me wrong, there were a bunch of banger Star Wars games under LucasArts, and it really does suck that a lot of people lost their jobs. But I can also see how it would be beneficial to Disney and Lucasfilm to just license out the property. It's just a matter of choosing the right person, and when it comes to EA, they kinda did. I don't know, we'll explain that later. It's a very rocky relationship between these two, and I might get some hate in the comments for saying this, but I am completely for them not making the EU canon. There's a lot of bad stuff in the EU, and it honestly would make it so much harder for Disney to operate and do things in there if they made it canon. You couldn't make a sequel trilogy, you couldn't really make any shows because you'd be so limited in what you could do with some characters and time periods. The best thing they could have done was shut it down and still publish the books and let the writers continue to profit from their hard work, and guess what? That's what they did by rebranding it as Legends. You can still walk into a Barnes & Noble and buy these things, it's just not canon. And like I said, I'm completely fine with that, and I think a lot of people at this point actually are. I don't disagree with any of the decisions made right here. I think all of them make complete financial and creative sense, except for EA kind of. I have no problem with EA making Star Wars games, I just wouldn't have made it an exclusive thing. I would have just let Star Wars dip its toe into some other publishers, but I'm sure EA was just offering the biggest bag. But it wouldn't be until 2014 where we started to receive actual stuff, actual content, such as the new Star Wars animated series, Star Wars Rebels. While many prefer the pre-existing Star Wars The Clone Wars, Wars, Star Wars Rebels was acclaimed by critics and eventually adored by some fans. Disclaimer, I feel like I'm gonna have to say some about every Star Wars related thing, but people soon fell in love with the show's story, characters, and cool additions it made to the Star Wars mythos. The show had an impressive run of 4 seasons and ended in 2018 eventually. I'd say overall this was a very big success. While a little more kid-friendly than Star Wars The Clone Wars, it still took itself very seriously and adults could still watch it and find enjoyment in it and all the stuff that it offered to the Star Wars universe. But then, it was time. No more TV shows, no more games, no more business announcements. It was time for the main course, the main meal that was promised when Disney bought Star Wars, the sequels. Calling this a tough task is kind of an understatement. Continuing the legacy of Star Wars without your creator George Lucas is going to be tough. On one hand, he did create this universe and gave us some amazing film, but he also just delivered the, at the time, incredibly hated and despised prequels.
Star Wars The Phantom Menace was the most disappointing thing since my son.
It was honestly a safer bet to just go with other people. Was it kind of shady and two-faced the way that Disney went about getting the Star Wars property from George? A little bit. At the same time, we gotta be going in the mindset of 2013 Disney. George was just simply not making good movies.
I may have gone too far in a few places.
I like watching the prequels. I have fun with them, but I'm not gonna call them good movies.
You're so beautiful.
I respect and enjoy the story that they're trying to tell. It's just they didn't go about it the right way. I do not blame Disney at all for being scared to work with them. I just wish they were a little more honest behind the scenes. With the prequels, he had all the creative freedom in the world, and I think that is what hurt those films. He would not have been given that freedom. There would have been problems on the set. So yes, I respect their decision to move on. But they decided to hire 3 directors for the 3 films. Episode 7 would be helmed by J.J. Abrams, the director of the Star Trek reboots. Episode 8 would be helmed by Rian Johnson, the director of some Breaking Bad episodes and some cult action sci-fi films. And last but not least, Episode 9, which would be helmed by Colin Trevorrow, director of Jurassic World. On surface level, there's no issue with getting 3 different directors for 3 different movies. In fact, I think that's the best choice they could have made. That's what the original trilogy did, and it worked out pretty well. Not only would this give the films their own flair, but I'm sure it honestly would have been for the worst if a single director had to tackle 3 Star Wars movies in under 5 years. All seemed to be going well, but they had one issue. They didn't plan out the trilogy. No, that wasn't a joke, that's serious. We're definitely going to dive into this a little later in the video, but I wanted to address this first because this is an obvious issue. Not only did they need to get started on the sequel trilogy, they wanted to get out a new Star Wars movie every year, forever. Like, I'm not joking, that was their plan. Even the most die-hard Star Wars fans who live and eat and breathe this franchise were like, I don't know about that one, Chief. But the future movies were what they were, the future. Our eyes were set on what was next, what was coming first, and that was Episode 7, Star Wars The Force Awakens. I have a lot of nostalgia for the Force Awakens era, I'm not gonna deny it. I genuinely don't know if we're ever going to see a rollout like that again for a movie. Not only was this the first Star Wars movie in 10 years, but the sequel to Return of the Jedi, bringing back all our favorite characters, introducing new ones, appearing to go back to tradition, bringing back the writer to the most loved Star Wars movie of all time. I don't think people were wrong for getting excited. The trailers were amazing to this thing, and oh my gosh, the marketing. Force Friday has been a thing since the prequels. It's no surprise that Disney would cash in on this tradition, and wow did they. For those of you who weren't around for this marketing blitz, I don't know how to explain it, you just had to be there. Everywhere you turned in a department store, whether it be Target, Walmart, Toys R Us, any store in the mall, it didn't matter where you were going to see Star Wars slapped on a box. It was pretty cool, I'm not gonna lie. It was like I was living in a Star Wars owned dystopia. You know how everyone's really scared of like a United States-Chinese merger where we become just one big super country? Just replace China with Star Wars and that's basically what America looked like for the end of 2015. For all the quote-unquote normal people going into these stores, it kind of felt weird, like you were gonna miss out on something if you didn't go see this new Star Wars movie because it was literally everywhere, just shouting at you to go watch the movie. And oh boy did people do that. To this very day, Star Wars The Force Awakens is the highest grossing domestic film of all time. Not even Avengers or any other Marvel movie has since been able to top it, and I don't think another movie will for a very, very long time. Not just that, but the film was super highly acclaimed by critics, and at the time, very loved by fans. And to this day, I think a vast majority of people and Star Wars fans like The Force Awakens. There's just also a very loud minority trying to push an agenda of it being the worst thing ever since Satan. Oh my god. I have plans later down the line to make a video about each of the sequel movies, so I won't go too in depth with my thoughts on The Force Awakens. Just know I really like it. I think it is a super solid movie. Is it derivative of the original? Kind of, yeah. It hits a lot of the same plot beats and it's very visually and thematically similar, but I think it accomplished its mission of reintroducing Star Wars to a new generation and getting people back on the bandwagon and showing everyone that Star Wars is back and better than ever. It's not my favorite Star Wars movie of all time. It's not even my favorite in the trilogy, but it accomplished its mission and it did it in style. The movie is beautiful, gorgeous. It feels like Star Wars. The performances by all of the actors are so great. I think the new cast actually does an amazing job. I love Han Solo and Chewbacca's inclusion here. It introduced us to one of the greatest characters in all of Star Wars history. Shout out to my boy Kylo Ren. The score absolutely pops. I love Rey's theme. And man, that lightsaber battle at the end was so raw. It's just a good time. I'm not gonna act like the film doesn't have flaws or any issues because that's every movie. That's every Star Wars movie. None of them are perfect. But I don't know, I'd be forcing myself to not like this thing, and I find myself nitpicking at just random BS rather than actually giving solid criticism against this thing. The biggest thing I could levy at it is that it could have been a little more original. If you don't like this movie, that's completely fine. Let me know in the comment section down below. I'd love to know what you have to say. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. This just so happens to be mine. And this just solidified that Star Wars was back and bigger and better than ever. This entire year of 2015 was the revitalization of Star Wars. New movie, new game, new episodes of television. We were literally living in a Star Wars-owned America. I don't know what more you could have asked for. I don't think Disney could have handled the relaunch of Star Wars any better, and I'm being completely honest when I say that. They made an ungodly amount of money. And while 2016 wasn't as jam-packed because they didn't have as much to prove, we did get another movie, Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, our very first spin-off Star Wars movie. The film is a prequel to A New Hope, basically the film's title crawl. It's also a quote-unquote patch to A New Hope. The movie honestly only exists to explain a plot hole from A New Hope about the Death Star having a weak point, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. While to this day people talk about Rogue One in a good light and how there weren't that many issues with it, there was some stuff going on behind the scenes. Well, definitely not as drastic as some of the stuff we'll get to later down the line. Rogue One went through heavy reshoots, and not just traditional reshoots, heavy reshoots, altering the film even. Originally believing that Disney wouldn't allow a quote-unquote dark Star Wars movie, they got the green light from Disney to kill all of the characters in the movie and have Darth Vader just slaughter a bunch of rebels. But the director of the reshoots was not Gareth Edwards, the credited director of the movie. It was Tony Gilroy, who is now going on to be the showrunner of Andor, the Disney Plus series. There's no confirmed reason for why all of this happened, and I doubt there's any bad blood or ongoing drama because Gareth Edwards seems to be very cool with Star Wars and Lucasfilm still. This is just the first of a minor slip up behind the scenes of these Disney Star Wars films. But Rogue One would release later that Christmas, and while this isn't me wishing that a Star Wars movie fails or that any movie fails, this movie was very much so a success, and I think Disney learned the wrong lesson from it, but we'll get into that later. It did very well critically and amongst fans, and to this day holds a positive reputation with both, and did even better financially, being the second biggest movie of the year, being beat out by Captain America Civil War, but just barely by 100 million. It actually did better than that film at the domestic box office, and it's very impressive that a film that doesn't really have a signature main character was able to almost beat out basically the Avengers. So we're halfway through this video and I'm sure you're asking, Ricardo, this video is called The Problem with Disney's Star Wars. This sounds like no problem at all. It sounds like they've done nothing but an amazing job at revitalizing the property. Well, up to this point, 100% so. While all of the months in the year would be filled out by books, merchandise, the continuing Star Wars Rebels, and other content, every year was really just building towards December, where we got our new Star Wars movie, and 2017 would be no different with Star Wars The Last Jedi, the next film in the sequel trilogy. While not as big, the film still had a massive marketing blitz. Here's a photo of me and my dad outside of Target on Force Friday. I was like, what, 14? I know, I don't look like it, it's a disease. This is the film helmed by Rian Johnson, Johnson, who I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the 3 different directors that the sequels would have. The marketing to this film was promising a darker Star Wars film. And not only that, Disney and Lucasfilm were showing a lot of confidence in Rian Johnson, with intentional leaked reports coming out that Disney believed that this was one of the best Star Wars movies, if not ever, and further showing their confidence by announcing that Rian Johnson would be getting his own Star Wars trilogy after the Skywalker saga wrapped up. Not only did the trailers do a good job of making this movie look like it was about to be the greatest thing ever put to screen, this just got the fan base even more confident and worked up about this movie. But little did they know what would be around the corner was the most divisive Star Wars piece of media to ever release. I would debate the most divisive movie to release in recent years. Let's get this out of the way first. Star Wars The Last Jedi was a success. We cannot deny that. I know there are a lot of people out there who are going to try to say this movie was a flop, it didn't succeed. You're just lying to yourself. Star Wars The Last Jedi was the biggest movie of 2017 with only a few weeks in that year left. It wiped the floor with everything that released that year, and it honestly was really good competition. The 3 Marvel movies that released that year didn't even touch it. Star Wars is just generational. It's like religion at this point to people, so its success doesn't really come as a surprise, but I don't like the narrative that this thing was a failure. But enough dancing around it, and I will say my dancing was pretty beautiful. We have to talk about the movie itself. I'm gonna try to speak about this objectively, the response to it, and then I'll give my opinion on it so people don't click off the video yet. Like I said, this thing was incredibly divisive, but why was it? Star Wars The Force Awakens played it incredibly safe, like we said. It stuck to a lot of the same elements of the original Star Wars from 1977, not really taking a lot of risks. What a lot of people were asking for after this film was for the next one to take some risks, really push the franchise forward. And oh boy, did Star Wars Episode 8 really answer the challenge. This movie did not play it safe at all. It took a lot of risks, and it is known for being quote-unquote subversive. And I think it taking as many risks as it did, and Disney and Lucasfilm allowing this movie to even be made, deserves props on its own. So why don't Star Wars fans like this movie? It actively challenges what Star Wars means and the ideologies and themes that it represents. If Star Wars The Force Awakens is pulling the toys and dusting them off from the garage, Star Wars The Last Jedi is pulling the toys out of the box and putting them in the sandbox to be played with. The esteemed Luke Skywalker, essentially the protagonist of the Star Wars movies, a character that means a lot to a lot of people, had his character progress in this movie, change, evolve. It was very much so different from what was at the end of Return of the Jedi, and to that I would say, of course it is. Over 20 years have passed since that film. If 20 years goes by, you're gonna be a very different person from who you were 20 years before. Not just this, but a lot of people have issues with the fact that Luke almost killed his nephew and then eventually didn't go to another planet to kill his nephew. What a lot of people call out of character, I would call in character and progressing the character. As far as I can tell, that's the biggest issue people have with The Last Jedi. They also bring up the strong female character and Mary Sue stuff, but I don't see what y'all are talking about. Rey is struggling during this movie. She can't catch a break. Leia's knocked out like half the movie, and General Holdo kills herself. I don't know what you guys are complaining about. I'm sorry, this argument just doesn't make any sense. Like, half the women die in this movie. This is a Star Wars movie that actually surprised me in where it was going next. I love the characters. Each and every single one somehow manages to get a complete arc. The film is gorgeous. I love the score. It genuinely got me excited to see where it goes next. Once again, I'm not saying it's a perfect movie because I don't believe any film is. I think that the B-plot is kind of clunky, but it is still very Star Wars to me. I like the message that it's trying to get across, and I think that it gets it across very successfully. I just think that it kind of hurts the pacing of the film, and I would have replaced Rose with Poe in my opinion. But this is all subjective. I love The Last Jedi, and I don't think it comes as a surprise at this point that it's my favorite Star Wars film of the sequel trilogy. But I feel like I have to follow this up by saying, if you don't like The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, or anything Disney Star Wars, that is completely fine. You are all entitled to your own opinion, as I am mine. I just personally love what they did with this film, how it challenges, how it evolves Star Wars, how anybody can be a Force user, but still not subtracting from the Skywalkers as they are the protagonists. respect. I think that stuff is very important and very special. But like I said, this was divisive and fans let that be known. Star Wars discourse was insufferable and you can argue still is to this point. This was very successful for Disney financially, but the ramifications it would have on the future were not very good. I couldn't ask Disney to change anything about The Last Jedi. The artist in me respects the risk they took, and the only way for this to not backfire on them was if they played it safe. But the mistake they did make was releasing a new Star Wars movie 5 months after. Solo: A Star Wars Story. Almost about everything is wrong with this. I don't think Solo: A Star Wars Story is terrible, but it also is incredibly unnecessary. I don't know anybody who is asking for a young Han Solo movie. I think Rogue One made Disney think that people would just watch anything that is Star Wars, and this showed that that was not the case. Even if everybody loved The Last Jedi and it wasn't divisive whatsoever and there wasn't a mini Star Wars boycott by fans, I still don't think this movie would have performed well. It released only 5 months after our last Star Wars movie, but it was also sandwiched between Avengers Infinity War, Deadpool 2, followed by Incredibles 2 and Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. The young Han Solo movie that literally no one asked for was not gonna compete. I think this film had a much better shot if they just released it in December like all the previous Star Wars movies beforehand, and honestly from this point forward I think that's what Disney should do with all feature films. But what about the movie itself? What did I think? Well, I'll keep it brief. I think Solo is okay. Surprisingly, the best part of the movie is Alden Ehrenreich's Han Solo. He does an amazing job. Lucasfilm has definitely learned the wrong lesson from this experience. We want this, not this. Stop doing this. This looks weird. But like I said, the film is just so unnecessary. I think the film does more harm than good to the Han Solo character, such as revealing how he gets his name. We didn't need to know that. The film is kind of ugly. It's like watching a Zack Snyder movie. It's just like, I can't see what's going on. It's alright. I might watch it again one day in the future, but man, like I've been saying a million times, this did not need to exist. But if you like it, that's cool. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the behind the scenes of this movie. The original directors of Han Solo were Phil Lord and Chris Miller, the directors of the Jump Street movies and the Lego movie. I personally love these guys, and I think everyone loves these guys. I was so excited when I heard that they'd be helming the film. It honestly gave me faith in the movie. But during production, they said that they were relying too heavily on improvisation and that the film eventually turned into a completely different movie from what the screenplay was presenting. They had a majority of the movie shot, but they were shortly fired and replaced by Ron Howard. This is now a running theme. There was some weird director shakeup going on over at the Rogue One reshoots, and now there's this. But what if I told you this wasn't the only recent Star Wars director drama? The year before, Star Wars Episode 9 director Colin Trevorrow would release a film called The Book of Henry, and I'm sure Disney and Lucasfilm must have watched that movie and were like, yeah, nah, and swiftly fired Colin Trevorrow. Make this 3 Star Wars movies that have now had some kind of problem, and this is what I believe led to Star Wars Episode 9 being Disney's biggest mistake yet. 2019 was a huge year for Star Wars. Obviously, Episode 9, which would get the title The Rise of Skywalker, the first live-action Star Wars TV series, The Mandalorian, and the highly anticipated video game, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. With spoiler alert, the 2 ladders being very successful on their own, doing very well financially, critically, and with fans. But the most important part was The Rise of Skywalker, the finale to the Skywalker saga, which is now being helmed by the director of The Force Awakens, J.J. Abrams. He's back. And much like the 2 films beforehand, it was a very similar song and dance. Big marketing campaign, and obviously Star Wars fans were excited, but the shadow that The Last Jedi cast over this film couldn't have been ignored. The lead up to this film should have felt a lot more celebratory, because this was the end of the Skywalker saga. That's kind of a big deal. But with J.J. Abrams, Disney, all of the stars of the film, the mood just felt kinda dour. And I think that's the best way to sum up The Rise of Skywalker. Unlike the past 2 films, this wasn't the biggest movie of the year, and it did not come anywhere close. To be fair, Avengers Endgame was not going to get touched by literally any other movie that came out. For a brief time, it was the biggest movie of all time. James Cameron, you petty bitch. That didn't even reach top 5. Every Marvel movie that year outgrossed it, unlike 2017, including other Disney films such as The Lion King, Frozen 2. It still did very good, and it's not that big of a dramatic shift from Star Wars The Last Jedi, only by a couple $100 million. But yeah, what about the film itself? stuff. Well, if you don't like the sequels, this is where I'm on your side. Yeah, this is like bottom 5 Star Wars movies for me, not gonna lie. This film, I am shocked that Disney, Lucasfilm, anybody allowed for this to be as lazy and soulless as it was. This film was rushed, and oh boy does it feel like it. This movie is moving at 1,000 miles per hour, dumping things on you from the very start. Like, excuse me, you're just introducing that now? Okay. It honestly feels like J.J. Abrams just threw his hands up in the air and dragged Star Wars across the finish line, rather than giving it the triumphant finale, quote unquote, that it deserved. I don't see how this connects to all of the Star Wars films before and wraps this up in a bow. During the rollout for this movie, they were talking about how this isn't just a finale to the sequels, it's a finale to Star Wars. But like, how does this even tie in with the prequels? How does this barely even tie into the original trilogy? Yeah, we can go back to Tatooine for literally no reason. It looks nice. I think Kylo Ren and Rey are great Star Wars characters. This sucks, man. This really sucks that this is how it quote unquote ended. I'm genuinely on my hands and knees praying that when Star Wars eventually returns to cinemas, it will be with episode 10, so they can wrap this thing up properly this time. Because this is one of the worst finales I've seen, and this sounds terrible, and I sound like an awful person for saying this, but I don't think this movie gets enough hate for what it is. J.J. Abrams was the perfect person to restart Star Wars. He was not the person you should have got to finish it. We can just do something weird, like when Kylo brought Rey back to life, he impregnated her with a Force baby. Boom, you got a new Skywalker. The bloodline's not dead. I solved your problem, Disney. While 2019 wasn't a complete failure because they did get the ball rolling on some cool other Star Wars media, they ruined the thing that they should have got right the most, which was the finale to Star Wars. Oh god, how did we fall this far so quickly? Genuinely, Star Wars was on top of the world 4 years ago. I don't think it was in a better place than it was at that point. Racism was over, world hunger was cured, and then Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker literally sent us into the pandemic. I blame this movie for that. But now, we're in the 2020s. We're in a brand new decade, and Star Wars has been very slow. I still don't think that Disney and Lucasfilm have processed the failure of The Rise of Skywalker. The only Star Wars stuff that we've received in the 2020s is Season 2 of The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Tales of the Jedi, and Andor's in the middle of its run. Season 2 of Mandalorian was really solid. In fact, I think the entirety of Mandalorian is very solid. I think it's some of the best Star Wars content that we've ever received. Book of Boba Fett, however, is an absolute embarrassment to the entirety of Star Wars. That thing should have never been made. But Obi-Wan Kenobi, there were a lot of issues with that thing, and it probably should have just been a movie. They could have honestly had this been the next Star Wars movie if they just gave it a proper budget. I'm sure this thing would have sold like hotcakes if they actually focused on Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader. But we got a show instead that was super drawn out, poorly paced, and had a really bad budget and some really poor direction with a bunch of shaky cam. I just didn't love it. There is not a single Star Wars movie that we definitively know is actually coming out. There are a few in development, but whether we'll ever see those, we don't really know. Reportedly, Damon Lindelof is working on a new Star Wars film, and it has the most momentum out of any Star Wars film in production currently. The film is said to be taking place after Rise of Skywalker and could potentially even feature characters from the sequel trilogy, but like so many other Star Wars projects before it, I don't know if we'll ever even see this thing. Like this J.D. Dillard Star Wars project was announced in early 2020. We haven't heard a word about it since. Yeah, this thing's not happening. We were supposed to get a Star Wars movie next year called Rogue Squadron, directed by Patty Jenkins, but the movie has recently been canceled. There are actually countless Star Wars projects that are being canceled right now or put on indefinite hiatus. I think it goes without explaining at this point that Disney Star Wars after the release of Rise of Skywalker has been a complete and utter mess. I'm not saying everything has been bad. I really like that Lego Star Wars game that came out last year. I still like The Mandalorian. I'm anticipating to see what Kevin Feige is whipping up over there, and I hope that Rian Johnson does eventually get his trilogy. And as of right now, Star Wars is a mess, and it needs fixing. And rather than just saying that, I thought I would offer a solution. If magically I turned into Kathleen Kennedy, this is what I would do with the Star Wars franchise as a whole going forward. Not just the movies, not just the shows, not just the games, everything. First things first, we need to start over. I'm starting from scratch. We're cleaning house, baby. I've seen a lot of people go really drastic with it, saying that we forget the sequels, we just make them again, these aren't canon anymore. No! 2 out of 3 of the sequels are more than exceptional films. It just so happens that the last one is really, really bad. So no, we're not doing that, but I'm also not allowing it to be the ending. That's right, I joked about it earlier in the video, but I am dead serious. I want another Star Wars trilogy. Bring me episode 10, 11, and 12. I'm ready. I don't care that Episode 9 was marketed as the end, sometimes lying is okay. I'm not going to propose an entire final trilogy here, I think that would take us way too long, but find a competent producer like a Kevin Feige to oversee the production, and I think the every other year release order worked good for it. It's just you need to plan things out beforehand. The biggest issue I see right now with Lucasfilm is that they're not properly vetting their talent, and it's leading to firing and cancellation left and right. This wouldn't be an issue though under my watch, but if we get started on this like right now, we can get this movie out by that 2025 release date. Let's do this thing. That's a solid 6-year break between Star Wars movies. That's already the plan by Disney, so this isn't some like unrealistic thing. This is the projected release date for the next Star Wars film. And once when this trilogy is over in the 2030s, we'll do another trilogy that is set outside of the Skywalker saga now that it's over. Whether it be Rian Johnson or somebody completely new, I'm ready for the next generation right after. But what about TV? Star Wars is really diving its toe into the television market, so how do we handle that? Well, I'm sure a lot of people were excited when that Disney Investor Day happened. I was actually terrified. Look at all of this stuff. I'm sorry, this is way too much. I don't need a million different Star Wars shows. I can take a few of them and they need to be very different from each other. First things first, I think that live action Star Wars on TV is a necessity at this point, and I do really want to see it, and I want a zeitgeist show. I don't just want a random Star Wars TV show about a random character. I am excited for a show like Ahsoka, but I want something that I can continue to watch over and over rather than a limited series or something that just runs for a season or two. But I want something that will stay in the public consciousness and be super popular like a Game of Thrones, like a Stranger Things, that can run for a lot of seasons, and I think that George Lucas was onto something with Star Wars Underworld. I'm not saying that we're going to do Star Wars Underworld, but a big budget show with a big episode order, I think, is the way to go. I'm not really sure a time period right now. You could do before Phantom Menace, a quote-unquote ancient Star Wars of sorts, I don't know what you want to call it, but not another show set during the fall of the Empire that's at least live action. So I definitely think an Old Republic, High Republic thing is definitely the way you should go, but I also think animation is very important to Star Wars, and I want a proper follow-up to Star Wars Rebels, kind of similar to how Rebels was a follow-up to Clone Wars. Now this would be the show I have set after Return of the Jedi, and that's because I want a big focus on our legacy characters, because I still want us to get some content with them that doesn't need to be live action. I'm talking Luke, Han, Leia, you can even throw in Ahsoka and a bunch of other characters too, going on a bunch of adventures, finding different bad guys. I think it'd be very fun, and I have it run for a solid amount of time too. Not as long as the live action show, but around Clone Wars length, where the show eventually reaches a natural conclusion. And then once when these shows end, I think there's a lot of room for spin-offs or sequel series afterwards. It's just this looks yucky to me. It's too much stuff. We need it more streamlined and accessible to the public. And the same needs to apply to the video games. Video games is a big part of Star Wars too. There are a lot of them. I think Disney has the right mindset going on right now. They're reportedly planning to release a Star Wars game biannually, meaning 2 games a year. A smaller title towards the beginning of the year and a AAA release towards the end, and I think this is exactly the way to go, and even if Disney wasn't planning this, this is what I would have proposed. Now that EA's exclusivity license is over, I'm perfectly fine giving Star Wars to a variety of different studios. I just need to stop canceling all of them. I think they're doing an amazing job with publishing right now. Plenty of great comics and novels are releasing, so I don't see any issue with what's going on over there. And with merchandise, I think we need to step it up just a little bit. That might sound crazy because we're talking about Star Wars, but literally lightsabers are just a popular toy at this point. They're not even just Star Wars anymore. They've taken on a life of their own. Obviously continue the Force Friday tradition once when the new trilogy starts up, and continue to produce a lot of stuff of your legacy characters, as they're very iconic and are going to sell a lot to the young and old crowd. That's probably one of my bigger issues with sequel trilogy merch. Well, not only are a lot of the character designs not that merchandisable, like Finn and Poe, like you can't sell these. So my first step is make merchandise of your original characters. Darth Vader, Boba Fett, Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, obviously Yoda. And also make sure upcoming characters that you create and design have a more toyetic look to them. Masked characters, Jedi robes, armor, less guy in jacket stuff. This animated show that I'm proposing that will follow these legacy characters will give you reason to produce more merchandise of them. The plan is simple, just flood the market with content. Not a let's make a Star Wars movie every single year kind of flood the market, not a let's make a young Han Solo movie kind of flood the market, but a release a movie every other year type of thing, and make sure those movies feel like events, make sure that it's important, make sure that your show is high quality and it's in the cultural zeitgeist like some of the biggest shows out right now. Make sure you have an animated program that can appeal to all markets, but can also appeal to a lot of kids to get younger people into Star Wars again as well. Video game content is very important and very popular, and Disney knows this. Merchandise is where the money is. We've seen it before. They can do it again. I think it's obvious I love Star Wars. I wouldn't have been talking about this for over 30 minutes if I didn't. I also don't think Disney's Star Wars is the worst thing ever and the worst thing since Hitler. No, I I think Disney Star Wars has actually produced a lot more good content than bad. We're definitely getting more content than if Lucasfilm was still independent, but post Rise of Skywalker in the 2020s, Star Wars is in kind of a mess right now. I love this franchise and I want to see it succeed. I think the sequels and Disney Star Wars as a whole gets hated on way more than it deserves, and I kind of wanted to give an objective view on how Disney Star Wars has gone, but also my subjective opinions mixed in there. But also, if I was in charge of Star Wars, how I would change things. Star Wars is quite literally, no hyperbole, the biggest franchise in American history. It's no wonder why people care about it so much. It's no wonder why when a new movie's coming out, it's a very, very big deal. Some people just might not get it, but the kids who saw Anakin in themselves, who saw Luke in themselves, who saw Rey, Kylo, they get it. Star Wars means something. I was half joking when I said Star Wars is essentially a religion at this point. This is important shit to people. Disney and Lucasfilm have the most successful franchise of all time, and they're just not doing anything with it. And when they try to pick it up, it's like a wet bar of soap that they keep fumbling around everywhere. Disney is the perfect home for Star Wars, and I'm glad it's there. I don't want any other company handling it at this point. And they've proven to do a kick-ass job at handling the franchise before, specifically when The Force Awakens was coming out. They did so good, and they can do it again. I have faith they can do it again. They just need course correction. Even if I end up loving Andor, it's not the future of Star Wars, so at the end of the day I do believe Disney Star Wars is going to be okay. It just needs some cleaning up, and that's why the person who should clean it up should be me.
Wonder what you want right now, wonder what you want right now. Used to be proud about, used to be proud about it. Counting all my blessings and count my dollars, make it all better.